Hey everyone, this is Fabriello and welcome back to a new video. More specifically, this is part 2 of the last video I did, which was a video response to Eric London RPG about games that in his opinion need full from scratch remakes. I've made plenty of comments on that throughout my video, so check it out if you're curious. This, on the other hand, is my take on that topic. First, most games in my opinion don't need remakes, but as mentioned in my previous video, I'm not against remakes. Quite the contrary, actually. To me, they offer a great opportunity to re-experience classic games with a fresh coat of paint. Even more important, they offer new gamers the chance to actually experiencing games that otherwise would have been either forgotten or ignored for various reasons. I know that a lot of people is generally against the idea of more and more remakes, but consider that we are currently experiencing the golden age of remakes. I thought that it can be fun for me to have a go at this topic. Also, it is fun to speculate on which games and especially how I would remake them, because I usually have fun to think about that. I don't even think it's worth mentioning that most, if not all, of what I'm about to say is not going to happen, obviously. But it's always fun to dream, right? So we are going to have one honorable mention first, and then 10 entries of games or series that, in my opinion, might use some form of remakes. So, very different angle from just saying they need remakes. Let's just go with the honorable mention first, which is the Mother series. To be honest, I'm perplexed that Nintendo never re-released these games properly. Someone's texting me. I know that there are ways to play the Mother games. You can play the first one on the Wii U without even mentioning emulation and all of that. But legally, legit way to play it. There's the Wii U version of the first one. You can play Earthbound digitally in various ways. If you're crazy, you can buy the Super Nintendo card. Well, Mother 3, that's a totally different story since it's never been released in the West. But why isn't a Mother Trilogy collection on the 3DS or now on the Switch? They could have re-released them already on the Game Boy Advance, let alone on the DS, 3DS, or the Switch. And this series has a big cult following, so re-release some sort of in a sort of way would definitely do well financially. People, I'm sure, are more than willing to play Earthbound, Mother, and Mother 3. Also, imagine a Mother Trilogy HD collection on the Switch with the Octopath Traveler graphics. That would be amazing. But this is just a honorable mention because I haven't played the Mother series. As I said, it's not that easy, and I have other priorities at the moment. So let's move to my actual picks. And with the first one, we have an interesting one. At number 1, we have either Mimana, the ER Chronicle, Crimson Gem Saga, or Hexis Force, all of them on the PSP. And we're starting things with a sort of a threesome on the PSP. Ooh la la. Mimana is certainly the weirdest of the three, and the one that A, no one cared about, and B, required the most work, while the much better Crimson Gem Saga and the even better Hexis Force both deserves to be played by a lot more people. Let's start with Mimana, since, as I said, it's the one that actually needs the remake the most. This is an interesting game that could have and should have been better, but it had potential, and that's why I'm even bothering with it. Gameplay-wise, it's a Tales of game, basically. So we can work on that. For example, use the coat of paint and gameplay of Tales of Vesperia, for example. Even without being too ambitious with Tales of Berseria or the upcoming Tales of Arise, that's a bit too much, I think. But still, look at Tales of Vesperia on 360 or Switch, the Definitive Edition. That would be pretty cool for a game like Mimana, actually. Also, definitely, those dungeons absolutely need to be refined, as they are quite confusing and they have way too many random encounters. I'm talking about one every 2 seconds, or even less at times. Like you make one step, you fight, one step, you fight. It's really annoying, and I'm saying this since I'm okay with this old school mechanics, but it was almost unacceptable in Mimana. But gameplay and presentations are the main areas that need work. The story, of course, can be expanded, but I remember that it wasn't bad at all, actually. There is some good character development, for example. The protagonist, I think his name was Christ, not Christ, that would be weird, Christ, is but it's super unlikable at the beginning. We're talking like early Luke von Fabre level of unlikeliness, which is obvious and interesting tales of comparison there. But is very different by the end of the game, mainly because of the character of Sophie, the other main character of the game, who is, on the other hand, a very likable one. In fact, the thing I remember the most from Mimana, from the whole experience, in fact, is the song that on certain occasions Sophie sings throughout the game. And it's really beautiful, actually. I would love to hear that more clearly on a better console. But this is how a remake of Mimana might transform this okay game into a pretty damn good one, if I have to say so myself. But again, like no one cares about Mimana, so let's move to a better game, which is Crimson Gem Saga. Now, this is a goodie, and it's not that difficult to think about a remake. Just upgrade the graphics to HD standards, especially considering how gorgeous they already are on the PSP. That's basically all you need to do because the game it's absolutely fine. It's challenging, true, borderline very hard at times, especially at the beginning if you don't know what you're doing and how to play it. But once you learn the game's mechanics, it becomes quite manageable and you'll be able to fully enjoy this great RPG on the PSP. Now, what Crimson Gem Saga really needs is a sequel, but that's a story for another video. Let's examine the third game here, the excellent Axis Force. The game is already very good, so the only thing it really needs, once again, is a graphical update. Uh, because it's a PSP game, of course. Perhaps you can use the graphics from Tales of Hearts R, even more HD if it's possible. Or interesting suggestion, how about Exist Archives graphics and style, the latter in particular, as I think it can work pretty well for Hexis Force. The story or stories, I should say, are perfectly fine as they are. Both Cecilia's story and especially Levante's story, it's really cool actually. That's where the game really shines. Gameplay wise, the game again, it's totally fine and a lot of fun actually. I would even say it's definitely one of the best RPGs on the PSP under all these aspects. But perhaps we can pep it up by adding some additional mechanics. The first thing that pops into my mind right this moment is something like Octopath Traveler's system of weak spots. Your attacks carried by either a sword or magic, an axe, an arrow, etc. They all cause different type of damage against which an enemy is either weaker or stronger against. Or something like this that combined with the fact that in the original game you cannot perform all the attacks indefinitely, you'll eventually run out of action point or something like that. I don't remember how they're actually called, would include a good element of strategy that might even improve the gameplay and make the game even more fun than it already is. And as I said, it is a really good one. So that's my first pick. At number 2, my second pick for a game that can use a remake is the Phantasy Star series, more specifically the original tetralogy, so Phantasy Star 1 through 4, which after all are the best Phantasy Star games ever made, and it would be amazing to remake them as an HD collection so that more people can experience these absolute treasures of games. Personally, I think that 1, 2, and 3 should all look and play more like 4, which is not only the best of these 4, but the best of the entire series. Graphic wise, you can either use 4's graphics and update it to HD standards, or use more modern engine like, I'll use it again, Octopath Traveler 1, that would allow to have amazing nostalgic 16-bit visuals. Gameplay-wise, simply implement the combat system from 4 to the previous 3, since it was by a long shot the absolute best. And 4 also adds, you should add 4 speed when you're exploring the world, because if you play the first 3 games, they're all really slow. Really slow. 4 in comparison was on Nitro, man. It was super fast. And that's what you should do, basically. Also, a potential idea here, the dungeons in all 4 games can go back to the style of the first one. That would be a nice nostalgia candy there. So we'll bring back the 3D dungeons, which were a staple of that game and revolutionary at the time. But with some updates, of course. We wouldn't keep the same thing, because you can have those dungeons nowadays, because Phantasy Star 1 is a Sega Master System game. It's an 8-bit game. So all these dungeons, which by the end are huge, they look all the same, and it becomes ridiculously easy to get lost very quickly in them. So naturally we need to update the dungeons, but it would be very neat to have those 3D dungeons back again. One option, for example, could be make them look and play like Etrian Odyssey games, for example, including the mapping. That would be quite neat, actually, again. While combat-wise, within the dungeons would be the same as outside, so as I said, use the combat system from Phantasy Star 4, and not first person within the dungeons. Again, that's how I do Phantasy Star, but I think we really need a collection that includes all 4 games, because I know that only in Japan, though, there were remakes of 1 and 2 on PS2, but I don't know about those. Just, I think something like this would work very well. Also, because I would love to see a proper version of 3, since that game has a really interesting idea, an excellent concept for a grand story, but especially the gameplay was garbage, basically. It was a major letdown from 2. It returned to a sort of like a bad form of battle system from 1. So, such a waste, because 3 was, I think, quite ahead of its time as a game. And then 4 perfected, of course, the Phantasy Star formula. So I think that should be the main inspiration, and that's how I would do a Phantasy Star HD collection. The third pick, it's an interesting one, and it's remakes of Dino Crisis 1 and 2. Not RPGs, I know, but I never said it was going to be RPGs only, though let's be honest, other than this, all the others entry are going to be RPGs. The thing that drives me crazy about Dino Crisis is that Capcom is remaking all of these Resident Evil games constantly. They just released 3 and already announced the remake of 4 while working on 8. Jeez, Capcom, take a break. So, I mean, on the positive side, I would say this would mean that they're almost done with remaking the series. There's still Code Veronica, of course, which is one of the best, actually. And as we know, Resident Evil is actually a huge series and one of Capcom's main cash cows, so they'll keep shitting remakes as much as possible. How about the 2 Outbreak games on PS2? How about Resident Evil Gaiden on Game Boy Color? How about Deadly Silence on DS? Though technically this is a port of the first game. I mean, you get my point. We got enough Resident Evil games. It would be great for Capcom to take a break from this and move to the other excellent survival horror series they have under their belt that they haven't touched since the PS2 Xbox days. Dino Crisis. The series desperately needs to come back. The first Dino Crisis game, it's my personal favorite survival horror, and it would be ridiculously cool to see HD remakes of both the first and second game, because Dino Crisis 3 can go fuck itself, since it killed the series, basically. It was that bad. The thing is, these are super easy remakes to do. I understand that remaking them with 10 controls is asking too much to today's crowd, okay, so all you have to do is use the style and graphics of Resident Evil 2 or 3 HD remakes. That would be incredible. And that's all you have to do. Easy peasy. Also, just imagining Regina with those graphics. Wow. Regarding Dino Crisis 2, though, I would remove the whole shooter aspect that you kill dinosaurs and get points. That was fun, don't get me wrong, I liked it, but not really fitting with the survival horror theme of the game. With the modern gameplay style, the game is already more action based than it ever was, so there is no reason to keep the point system and all of that. So just make it more survival horror and less shooter, please. Also, they can add extra sections to both games that back then were not possible due to the technical limitation of the PlayStation 1. In the first game, for example, they really wanted to have an entire section in the jungle, but of course that was impossible back then. But that's really all you need to do with Dino Crisis. Also, remaking Dino Crisis 1 and 2 would hopefully convince Capcom to do a proper sequel to 2, which would be 4 because, of course, we're going to stay away from 3 as much as possible. I would love to do an entire video on how I would do Dino Crisis 4, which would be the real Dino Crisis 3, of course. So if you're interested, I might do that, as I have plenty of ideas, crazy ones, which would fit the game to a T. So let me know, or I might just do it because I love this series so much. I wouldn't mind talking about it for a while. So let's just move on to the fourth pick here, which is Lunar 2 Eternal Blue. This is definitely one of my most wanted remakes, and I'm surprised that it never happened, actually. Especially because it would be so simple. In fact, I kinda expected Game Arts to release Lunar 2 at some point. In a way, though wanted would be more correct, the game to be I wanted it to be released on the Vita, actually. As said, this is very simple. All that Game Arts had to do back then was a sort of Silver Star Harmony kind of remake. That's it. Just put it on the Vita. It would have been even better because it would have allowed for a slight update of the visuals that was offered on the PSP, which to me was already gorgeous. I love Silver Star Harmony. I know some Lunar purists don't love it. I don't care. I thought it was amazing, and at least it allowed me to experience that game. And that's why, to me, back then it felt obvious, and why I'm so surprised that it never happened. I don't know why Lunar 2, contrary to the first one, hasn't been re-released yet. Maybe there are some weird contractual issues I'm not aware of. But we haven't seen Lunar 2 since its original releases on Sega CD and the following PS1 ports. Since then, nada. Which is tragic. I remember a post published by Game Arts years ago that said that a remake of Lunar 2 could happen only if there was enough interest from the fans. Since then, again, nada. Maybe people don't care about Lunar anymore, which is a very sad state of affairs, if I have to be honest. Or, I know that Lunar Dragon Song was bad, but come on, it would be great to see a remake of a good one. So, yeah, I would really love to see a Lunar 2 remake. I don't think it's gonna happen anytime soon, but who knows? They remade Grandia recently on the Switch, so fingers crossed. Number 5, my fifth pick, Golden Sun. Another case of why hasn't this happened already? It seems that Golden Sun unfortunately has been abandoned by Nintendo, as we haven't seen anything about it since the DS days. But can you imagine Golden Sun remakes on the Switch? That would be amazing. Now, in my opinion, I don't think that we need the third game in the series to be remade. The first two games are perfect as they are. They tell a great, well-contained and conclusive story. Don't get me wrong, I liked Dark Dawn very much. It's a good, solid RPG on the DS and a good sequel. But considering the way it ends, it desperately needs a sequel that ends the story. And to me, they should have done this already on the 3DS. They completely missed the train. I don't know why. Maybe Dark Dawn wasn't successful as they hoped. I don't know. But as it is now, the series is just left in limbo, hoping to be concluded somehow, and I don't know if or when it's gonna happen. Golden Sun to me, it's a classic Nintendo franchise that can be sold so well and easily, and it baffles me that they haven't done really anything with it. I realize it's a JRPG series and it doesn't have the same weight as Mario or Zelda for Nintendo, but still, I think that potentially is their best or one of their best RPG series. To me, if you like RPGs, you have to play Golden Sun, at least the first two, because they're that good. But again, Nintendo's done nothing with it, and as said, it's not that difficult to do something with Golden Sun. For example, I remember at one point they teased Isaac, the main character from the first game, in Smash Brothers. Why didn't this happen? I hope it's not because of reasons like, oh, he's a Swords character and there are too many of them already, because that's stupid. I mean, if they find the space for Cloud, who's not even a Nintendo character, why not Isaac? Putting him into Smash would have been a good opportunity to reignite people's attention toward the series. Also, they could have continued with Golden Sun amiibos of the main characters and the Jins. This would have been to me the smart first steps in reviving the series and ideally, in a medium to long run, would have brought to a new game. Step 2, of course, would have been remakes of the games and, at first, only of the first two games. And if sales of these are good, you can then remake Dark Dawn to have the Golden Sun train going. Personally, I wouldn't do Golden Sun HD Remake and then Lost Age HD Remake, but bring them together as one big epic HD remake on the Switch. After all, these two games were originally intended as one for the Nintendo 64, but then moved to the GBA and split it into two parts due to the GBA's technical limitations. This would be a good story, actually. You can sell this, you can play Golden Sun, and it was originally envisioned by the developers, or something like that. I would like something like this. Regarding the games proper, the only thing that needs updating, again, what a shocker, are the graphics. I said, and I believe, that the games look gorgeous. But, to be honest, you can't sell GBA graphics today. Let's be real. Simply use the Octopath Traveler engine once again. That would work fabulously for Golden Sun. That's all you have to do. Other than graphics, you don't really have to change much, because the games are pretty much perfect as they are, especially gameplay-wise, which is where the games actually shine. Basically, I will maintain the exact same combat system, so turn-based, but just make it prettier. So that's how I would do it. But as an extra, I would add one more thing, an entire new section, maybe at the end of the game or as a reward for finishing the game. So sort of not really New Game Plus, but something like that. And I would add a story section dedicated specifically to the Mars Adepts, like Saturos, Menardi, Karst, and Agatio. After all, they are the most interesting characters. And this is an element in which Camelot has always been very good to me since the Shining Force games. They often portray both sides of the story. Look at Saturos and Menardi. At the beginning of the game, they are portrayed as the villains. They attack your village and they're constantly in your way. However, as the story unfolds, we understand more about them and their motivations, and turns out that they are not as villainous as we thought at the beginning. Of course, they've done bad things, so you can justify them, but at the same time, you realize that they just want to save their own village and their people, and they're doing what they think is right. However, they walk a grayer area than your party, and their attitude toward their mission is more of like by any means necessary, that inevitably comes into conflict with the protagonists. Also, these characters are quite unique looking without the world of Golden Sun. They are humans, but they have reptilian scales, and they apparently descend for dragons, which is a big plus to me, of course, or something like that. I don't remember well, but considering the important part that they play in the story, however, it would be very cool to explore this side of Golden Sun a little bit more. I think it deserves it, and it will make the whole world feels more complete. Overall, this is how I would do a Golden Sun remake. If it sells well, you can then work to remake Dark Dawn as well, and finally make a new game. Hopefully people will be interested in all of this. If not, again, it is indeed a very sad state of affairs. My sixth pick, at number 6, the Wild Arms series. What the heck happened to Wild Arms? We haven't seen a game in the main series since the PS2 and overall since the PSP, in both cases an eternity ago. The series has always been a personal favorite of mine. The idea of a steampunk western themed JRPG, it's what made Wild Arms so special since I've played the first game on PS1. Wild Arms, however, has always been a relatively niche series and never really a big seller, unfortunately. But I think that it must have enjoyed some success at some point. Most likely it did better in Japan rather than over here, what a shocker. But it must have been relatively popular at some point. After all, you don't make all those games and an anime series if it wasn't popular. It is a surprisingly big series if you think about it, and the developers are still around and going strong. I mean, since Wild Arms XF, Media Vision has developed prominent titles such as Valkyria Chronicles 3, Revolution, and 4, some Shining games, and the Digimon story games. That is some talented developers there. Not surprising, though. Thinking about it, however, it makes me realize that this is a tricky choice. I love Wild Arms very much, and I would love to see it come back, but it's difficult to suggest a proper way to do this. This series is well within the niche status, meaning that it's not a big seller, as I said earlier, so it's hard to suggest to remake the entire series. To be honest, a big HD collection with all 5 games would be very neat, but extremely unlikely, and I mean it within this scenario. I know that in the real world, a Wild Arms remake is not going to happen, but the point of this video is to suggest a pour parler kind of situation, because we love these games or series. Consider this. If the Xenosaga Trilogy HD remake was rejected because it was viewed as not profitable enough to justify the costs, I don't see Wild Arms actually succeeding in a similar situation. Also, I don't think that Media Vision has the resources that Namco has, so this would be a massive gamble that unfortunately I don't think would pay off for them. What about individual games then? In this case, the most reasonable suggestion would be a remake of the first one. After all, a lot of people would argue that it's the best of the series. However, the first Wild Arms has been remade already, and in the previous video I commented that it is a bit weird to suggest the remake of a remake. At the same time, we can argue that since Alter Code F was released in 2005, enough time has passed to propose a new one with an entire fresh coat of paint that would ideally reignite people's interest in the series. Personally, my favorite in the series is actually 3, and I would love to see a remake of that with either the Dragon Quest XI or Valkyria Chronicles 4 graphics. That would be gorgeous. At the same time, however, you can really release the HD remake of the 3rd game of the series. It would be way too much out of nowhere. In the long run, I think that a new game would actually be the better for the series, and if successful, you can tease the possibility of remakes. An important element that should be emphasized is the key element of the Wild Arms games is their setting. That Western world, and as a consequence, its fantastic music, to me it's in a way the main character of this series. Therefore, you have to like Western to fully enjoy a Wild Arms games. But if you don't care about Western, then you're not going to care about this series. This is something I would really like to explore in a future video, and that's the importance of setting. If you strip Wild Arms of its Western setting, since we're talking about that, it would lose so much of what makes it special. At the same time, however, this is where it gets tricky, because Western is really out of fashion. That's why, for example, you don't really see Western movies anymore. And when they try to release one every now and then, they're usually flops. I don't give a crap about that, as Western is one of my favorite movie genre, and to have a Western themed RPG series was and still is a dream come true to me, as it combines two of my favorite things. But if you're trying to appeal to the mainstream audience, that's going to be challenging. They can perhaps capitalize on the success of Red Dead Redemption, a Western game, though, and I cannot think of anything more mainstream than a Rockstar game. Obviously, I'm not suggesting to make Wild Arms like Red Dead Redemption, as that would be incredibly awkward, but try to take advantage of this game's success that perhaps slightly increase people's attention toward the Western genre in gaming at least. Before, when commenting on how out of fashion Westerners are, I was thinking primarily about movies, but gaming, of course, it's a different beast entirely. So, to summarize this never ending Wild Arms discussion, honestly, I think that a new game would be the best solution. If we have to go the remakes route, then we can either go for the first game to also reintroduce people to the series, though I don't know because of the fact that this game has already been remade, and I'm usually weirded out by the idea of the remake of a remake. Another option is skipping the first game and remaking the sequels, but that would be weird again. Very much a who wanted this kind of situation. Or we can remake the odd one, go for XF for a proper who the hell wanted this. When I started this, I didn't expect Wild Arms to be this challenging. Since I love this series, I was, of course, Wild Arms needs to come back. But then I was, oh my god, what are we going to do with it? So let's just move to the next entry. And my seventh pick is the Shadowhearts series. The current status of this series is not the stuff of legends, but the stuff of tragedies. Shadowhearts is one of the best series on the PS2, mainly because of its uniqueness to me. The blend of Lovecraftian horror and alternative history, its phenomenal combat system, of course, the great music, the unforgettable characters. Long story short, these games are true gems. Unfortunately, they didn't have the success they deserved, maybe because of the very stiff competition on PS2, who knows. Luckily, this is going to be easier than Wild Arms because there's mainly one thing you need to do: update the graphics again. That's it. Do not even think about changing that combat system though, since that's at least half of the reason to play the series. Whatever remake or new game, if it has the Shadowhearts title on it, it has to have the Judgment Ring system. Perhaps we can introduce some additional story segments here and there. For example, I would definitely expand the backstory of Karin's family in Shadowhearts 2. Let's call it the Fall of the House of Coing, very Edgar Allan Poe there, as that's an important element of her character. It's because of that, after all, that she joined the German army to begin with, so it would be interesting to know more about it. Also, you can introduce a new playable character, like some RPG remakes sometimes like to do. I'm looking at you, Devil Survivors. That could be also interesting. Also, you only have to remake the first two games, technically, because From the New World, it's not the third in the series, but a spin off. Of course, if sales are so out of control, it would be very cool to remake From the New World as well, let's say for completionist's sake. Also, the more Shadow Hearts game we have, the better, I think. But just imagine Shadow Hearts 1 and 2 HD collection, that would be the best day of my life. Graphically speaking, an obvious option would be using the Final Fantasy VII Remake engine. That would be incredible. Although, as good as that is, thinking about it, I would actually go for something slightly different. The graphics from Nier Automata. Maybe it doesn't look as good, well, it's still a gorgeous looking game, but I think the Nier's graphics would fit the mood and tone of the games a bit better. Remember, Shadow Hearts, after all, is a horror-themed RPG series, so it needs to be dark and creepy, somber and unsettling. And I think the Nier's style better encompass all of this. Also, if this hypothetical remake is successful, that would open the doors to a potential sequel that would be amazing. It can be either a proper Shadow Hearts 3 or an entire new saga, and I would personally prefer this. To be honest, I really want to do an entire video on how I would continue and do a new Shadowhearts story. I know it's kind of a waste of time since it will never happen, but I just want to talk about these games. I love this series and I want to spread the love for it, even though I realize the limited impact of my channel, but I don't care. I love this series so much and I believe everyone should experience Shadowhearts, so I will do some focus videos in the future, so look out for those. Let's move to the next entry, the number 8, which is Stellar Glow. Now this is interesting because I'm currently playing this game right now, and so far I've pumped roughly 30 hours into it. To be honest, it feels a bit weird to talk about a game I haven't finished yet in this list. And also, I don't. Stellar Glow definitely doesn't need a remake because the game is pretty much perfect. I'm loving the story and characters so far. The gameplay is great. The music is phenomenal. So why am I including it on this list? In my opinion, it might use a remake for another purpose. Maybe more people will play it. Stellar Glow to me falls into the category of those niche JRPGs on the 3DS that not many people played, like Seven Dragon 3 for example. Great game, but who played it? And it's from the same developers, so there might be a pattern here. A remake on the Switch might be a good opportunity to try getting more people into this great game. After all, everywhere I look at, the number one comment attached to Stellar Glow is, I wish more people played it. This is what triggered me to put it on this list. It's a fantastic game that unfortunately fell quite under the radar, and a remake maybe might get more people to experience it, since it's totally worth it. Even in my case, it took me years to play it. I bought the game a couple of years ago, but didn't play right away. Though in my defense, I just gave precedence to other games. But also I had Leo who always said to me, "Dude, play Stellar Glow. It's so good." So I'm glad that I finally listened to him now because this is such a good game. I'm curious to know a bit more about this game, especially in terms if this was Image, Epoch, or however you say the studio's name, last opportunity, or if the writing was already on the wall for them. It would be fascinating if Stellar Glow is a sort of Fire Emblem Awakening kind of situation that went wrong for them. As we know, Awakening was Intelligent System last chance with the series back then, since Fire Emblem was not doing well at the time. And it's surprising to say because now it's doing very well. And if Awakening was anything but a big hit, Nintendo most likely would have pulled the plug on the series. And as they say, the rest of this, it's history. Awakening was a huge financial and critical success that completely turned around the fortunes of the entire series, which now, thanks to Awakening, has become a priority to Nintendo. Maybe Stellar Glow followed a similar trajectory, since it is Image Epoch's last developed game. Maybe this was their last chance. They gave their all and created this fantastic game that unfortunately didn't experience the same success, and they weren't as lucky as Intelligent Systems at the end. I'm just speculating here, of course, but because I have no idea what happened. Maybe the studio was already done and they decided to go for one last ride before the end. But it's always fascinating and to speculate on this, since this is a sort of behind the curtain aspect of the gaming industry in which I'm always interested. But regarding the possibility of a remake of the game, the only thing that you, if you want, can improve in Stellar Glow are just the graphics. Though, let me say immediately that I think the game looks absolutely gorgeous on the 3DS. However, those are still 3DS graphics, and with some people they might be hit or miss. I'm just giving them the benefit of the doubt here. So perhaps you can upscale them to HD levels. That would be nice. As I said, this is an already gorgeous looking game after all. Perhaps you can do something like Atlus does for its remakes, and I'm using quotations here. Look at Radiant Historia, for example. It was released on the DS, and it's, by the way, one of the best games on that console. And it has been re-released on the 3DS recently, and last year, I think. And for what I understand, though I might be wrong, though, since I haven't bought that, this is basically a slightly better port, not even a remake. I think the game looks basically the same, or maybe certain things might be prettier. Uh, if I remember correctly, there's a new character, some additional story sections then, and stuff like that, but nothing major. So maybe you can do something like this with Stellar Glow, which might be good after all, since it will require less resources from Sega or whoever owns the rights to these games. I have no idea now I think about it. It might be Sega. And mentioning Sega makes me think of something crazy. Since the new Sakura Wars game has been released on PS4 recently, how about using those graphics for a more ambitious remake of Stellar Glow? Crazy, I know. It would still look very anime, very bright and colorful and cute, which stylistically it's how Stellar Glow should look, even though the game has plenty of dark moments. Also, a personal note here, having Tite Kubo doing the character models and the art for the game, it would be amazing. So as said, that's the bigger option for a Stellar Glow remake on the Switch, while the previous one, we can call it the more lazy option. Also, put some hype behind it, because people might be more inclined to buy it if you give the game some push. What a shocker. That's all I want to do with Stellar Glow, because as I said earlier, it's so good that it doesn't need much refinement. The only thing that it needs is more people to play it. Let's move to number 9. And this, again, this is interesting. I decided to pick Dragon Quest IX. This is not my favorite Dragon Quest game by a long shot, and if I have to be honest, it's, in the grand scheme of things, it's actually one of my least favorites. It's a good one, of course, don't get me wrong, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I wanted to. But in his advantage, it has one element that I absolutely loved, but to me was not properly exploited. Its premise, or in a more general sense, we can call it its setting, which consequently also influenced the game's story. This is in fact, as it is now, the game it's rather generic. It wasn't bad, just not very interesting. It is well known, in fact, that the game truly shines if you manage to play its online functions, which to me was never an option, so all I got was its rather underwhelming story. Especially if you compare with 8, there's no comparison there. On top of that, I'm still and always will be of the idea that the game should have been released on the Wii instead of the DS, as that would allow the developers to craft a truly titanic epic game. Don't get me wrong, Dragon Quest IX is a must-have and must-play on the DS, but it should have been released on the Wii, damn it. So, as said, the main strength of the game to me is the setting. Dragon Quest IX, its premises at least, it's centered around heaven. You play as a sort of fallen angel, not in a bad sense, you just literally fall from heaven, who has to go around the world to collect the fruits of the Yggdrasil tree. But then the game starts to go crazy by introducing God, a sort of woman version of Jesus, a Lucifer wannabe fallen angel, an evil one in this case. All very cool stuff that should have been, to me, the focus of the game. They are, but only by the end. 80% of the main story was focused on collecting these fruits. And I realized that they were connected with the other stuff, but still, I think they should just go crazy with the entire setting. And this is how I would remake the game, although this would be a very, very radical one. Almost an entire new game thinking about it, but why not? Let's use Eric Landon's term for this game. So this is going to be a full from scratch remake, actually. Make this game all about heaven and hell. Very Black Sabbath there. Keep the main plot elements such as God, the female Jesus, the crow Lucifer, but make the entire game about an epic war between heaven and hell in the Dragon Quest world, with the world of the mortals caught in the middle. That, to me at least, would be absolutely epic. You play as a nameless Celestian, as angels are called in this game. You can have more of them joining your party, like for example the ones already introduced in the original game, like Aquila, Pavo, but also some new ones. You can recruit both humans and demons. Story-wise, you can have the classic Dragon Quest plot twist. The main villain is actually a small fry compared to the true main villain. So you can have that, and heaven, hell, and humans. They're all being fooled and used by the real villain. It can still be Corvus, who's trying to take over or destroy everything. So heaven, hell, and humans have to join forces to defeat the common enemy, or something like this. Well, I'd like it. I don't know you, but I would love a Dragon Quest games like this, to be honest. This was number 9, so let's move to the last entry in this list. At number 10, the Breath of Fire series. Eric mentioned it in its video, and in my previous in the video response, I said I would expand on this here, and here we go. I've kept the most special last, of course. As you know, Breath of Fire is my favorite series of all time, and I thought about ways to revive the series or remaking the games for a long time, because as I firmly believe, and I'll defend this with my dying breath, that every JRPG fans should experience this treasure of a series. To me, there are fundamentally 3 essential steps in remaking Breath of Fire. Let's look at them individually. 1. An HD collection of Breath of Fire 1 through 4. In order to do this, I would simply use the best HD version possible of the graphics from 4, since they were and still are gorgeous. Story-wise, the games are fine. Perhaps you can add new sections and characters here and there to the individual games. One in particular might need some of this, not the others though. But that's overall less important, I think. Gameplay-wise, I would just implement the Breath of Fire 4's amazing turn-based combat style and mechanics to all the others, since to me that it's still one of the best battle systems ever made in a turn-based game. Use what you have, basically. You don't have to go crazy. And I think that with these, not major modifications, you can churn out an amazing collection that, if successful, can trigger more Breath of Fire, ideally a new series featuring new incarnations of Ryu and Nina. That would be the greatest day of my life, basically. But Fabriello N, what about 5, you might ask? Well, I'm glad you asked, guys, because my second step in remaking the series is entirely focused on that game. I would officially separate Dragon Quarter from the rest of the series, not because I think it's bad, quite the contrary actually, but because it's so radically different and we can use that at our advantage. So use Dragon Quarter to create a parallel spin-off series. Don't call it Breath of Fire 5, simply call it Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter, officially. Use the Dragon Quest XI graphics, since that's the best self-shaded graphics around, and after some improvements and tweaks here and there, sell the game as a Souls-style game. I've read an article that described Dragon Quarter as a sort of proto-Souls game, whatever that means, but that is interesting. And considering that Souls games are super popular, that can be an interesting direction for a potential spin-off series, and if successful, you can then create more Dragon Quarter sequels. In this case, when releasing the hypothetical Dragon Quarter 2, you can call the sequels to the main series simply Breath of Fire 5, 6, etc. Because step 3, Breath of Fire 6 should be cancelled from existence and never mentioned ever again. You can see there I purposefully even completely mistake the name. I went immediately for a good one instead of that piece of garbage. But in a nutshell, this is how I would remake the entire Breath of Fire series. And that's the list of the games that, in my opinion, might use some forms of remake. Agree or disagree? Let me know in the comments down below or make a video response. What are some games that in your opinion either need a remake or would benefit by being remade in some way? I would be very curious to know about that, so definitely let me know, guys. So thanks so much for listening rather than watching, because I'll admit it is a bit easier for me and much more convenient to do these recordings rather than proper videos. But you haven't missed much, to be honest, as the alternative was just looking at my face while talking, so not that interesting. So once again, thanks for listening. I hope you're all safe and take care.